Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. My name is John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and in this week's podcast episode, we're going to be talking about going from ministry burnout to life-giving business, because that's really the story of today's guest. My friend, Jeff Gauss, has been on that path of serving for many years in pastoral ministry. You're going to hear him share a story about really hitting a wall of depression and some mental health challenges and a season of just total burnout, which led him into a place of launching a business. And now he's finding all kinds of ministry opportunities through that business. It's very life-giving. He's in a much healthier place and a much healthier season in his life, and has a really powerful story to share. So I'm grateful that you're joining us and tuning in to this week's episode. Without any further ado, let's hear from Jeff Gauss. Here we go. Well, Jeff, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the EntrePastors podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Bet, man. I always tell people when they come on that your life is never going to be the same now. You probably aren't going to be able to go out in public and have a normal evening with your family, because you're just going to be so famous for being on this show. But get ready.
It's a price I'm willing to pay.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Hey, I've been looking forward to our conversation, Jeff. I've known you for a number of years now. I had a privilege and pleasure of being a coach in your life for a season. You got to be a part of a mastermind that I did years ago. And I'm really proud of seeing the work that you've done. And we'll kind of get into some of that here in our conversation, because it's very relevant to our audience of people that are in pastoral ministry or have some kind of a ministry context in their life, and also who are, building businesses to, do better financially and instill some extra streams of revenue for their family. So before we get into all the business talk, let's just back up and tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're at in the world today, and then we'll back up and fill in some details from there.
Yeah, well, currently residing in Southwest Florida after the Lord released me from 38 years of purgatory in Minnesota.
Praise God.
So when God opened the door, I didn't waste any time getting out. So we moved to Southwest Florida about a little over 3 years ago. So one of the better life decisions I've made. Been married to my wife, Heidi, for 28 plus years, and we have 6 kids, and ranging from ages of 12 to 23. So 3 boys and 3 girls.
Awesome. So were you born and raised in Minnesota then?
So I was actually born in Georgia. But my family then moved to Chicago when I was a few months old, and then we moved to Minnesota when I was 8. So lived in Minnesota from the time I was 8 to 47-ish, I guess. Okay. So, and then two years as an adult spent back in the Chicago area.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that transition to Florida, because there's kind of a ministry thing there as well, some church stuff as well as your business stuff there. But let's talk about the early days of pastoral ministry for Jeff, just a little bit, to give our audience kind of a idea of what your journey into pastoral ministry looked like and where you've been. So kind of give us some of the highlights wherever you want to take us in that part of the story.
Yeah. And, I don't know how deep in the weeds you want to get, but in 2001, I planted my first church in St. Paul, Minnesota. So kind of in a, I guess, urban young professional area. And that did not make it. So that was like my baby for 5 years. I had dreamed about that and planned for it and prayed about it. And, then we got to launch that. And it was a pretty painful slog for 3 years for a number of reasons. Part of it was that I was young and had no idea what I was doing. I was 27 when we planted that church. But there's a lot of things. So anyway, that ended up closing the door on that after 3 years, and took some took some time off to heal. And I say I kind of got tricked back into ministry by a mentor of mine that said, hey, there's this church that, you know, needs a fill-in preacher, if you go, and found out that this was a little country church like 2 hours north in a town of 65. And so I went from a church plant where at 27 I was the oldest person in our church to a little country church where I was the only person that didn't have white or blue hair. And and so that was a little bit of a culture shock. um but long story short, I ended up spending 2.5 years there, and God really did a work in me in that church, and just kind of affirmed my calling of who I was. Because I planted this urban church, and I was like, if I'm not the hip urban church planter guy, who am I? And so then God like took me to a completely different context, as rural area. I didn't even know how to say rural. I was like, how do you rural? So that was a bit of a culture shock. But anyway, really good time, and God really rekindled my heart for church planting in that time as well. Went from there to Northwest Minnesota, a small town up there, and was part of a church plant there that God just totally blessed and did amazing things in, and was there for 8 years before handed the baton to our next gen pastor in 2016, and he's still leading it today, still doing an awesome job. So shout out to Maddie Taus at Epiphany Station in Thief River Falls, Minnesota. And from there I went to Grand Forks, planted a church. So third time, and Grand Forks, North Dakota. And this is where the story hits a serious road bump. So about 2 years into that, I just hit a wall. Serious burnout. Like I describe it as like driving 100 miles an hour down the freeway, in a convertible, beautiful day, you got the top down, and it's just like a glorious day, and then you just slam into a brick wall. And it's like, Carey Nieuwhof's book, Didn't See It Coming.
Yeah.
It's like totally didn't see it coming. Looking back, I could see the warning signs, but like I was just telling people, like literally like a few weeks earlier maybe, that I was feeling the best that I had in years. And I've learned post burnout that the reason why that is because I was running on adrenaline. And adrenaline gives you this high, but it's short term. And once that adrenaline runs out, because you burned up all your serotonin, you start drawing on adrenaline. And then when your adrenaline's gone, then you crash. And so
what did that crash look like for you? You don't have to go deep into details, but like how do you know you've crashed when you're church planting, and then like define crash? What does that look like?
Yeah, for me it was pretty clearly defined. I think there's a lot of other pastors and leaders that really struggle, are burned out, and are just continuing to go through it. But for me, it's pretty clearly defined. Like I can remember the moment. Like I was sitting at my breakfast table eating my Raisin Bran, and we were in the midst of, our church had moved into a new space, and we're in the midst of doing this renovation of our kids' space. And I was rushing to get it done for our fall kickoff. And my wife, was just like started like peppering me with questions, and not any malicious or nagging, it's just like, well, what about this? What about that? And I just remember sitting there and just feeling like I am so overwhelmed right now. Like I can't take another question. I was just like, I just put my head down at the table and just started to sob. And it was like,
yep, that's a warning sign.
Yeah, it was like, what is going on here? Like, I love Raisin Bran. Come on. So it was, there was a really humbling experience. And then that week, I just tried to like power through it, and I would just find myself crying like all the time. And one of our elders was like, hey man, like what's going on? We want to give you some time off, so they gave me said, hey, take 2 weeks off. And so that time I'd already been seeing a counselor, and for the past year dealing with some other stuff. And my counselor's like, she referred me to a doctor. She's like, I really want you to see a medical professional, make sure there's nothing else going on. And when I went to see that medical professional, did the questionnaire and everything, she diagnosed me with burnout, which I didn't know was an actual thing. And I think that's because they used to call it having a nervous breakdown.
Huh.
Like, burnout maybe sounds a little bit more politically correct, but I didn't know what that was. I just thought that meant you were really tired. But I learned a lot about it then. And she was like, you need to take a year off from ministry or you're going to kill yourself.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? Like, I can't even take a week off. Like, I'm in 2 years into a church plant, I can't even take a week off. And but that was really sobering. Like to hear that from a medical professional say you're burned out, you're going to kill yourself. And even then I started to realize that like in the course of a week's time, like I'd gone through like 5 different stop signs or red lights while driving.
Wow.
And other people pointed out like, what are you doing? Like riding with me. And I'm like, but it's just like I hear that from other people who've gone through burnout. Like you're unaware of what's going on around you because you're so overwhelmed by it. So you're just kind of in your own world and you're not paying attention to those things. And so I knew for my own soul that I just, at that point it was like it wasn't even a decision anymore. It was like I wasn't I wasn't at risk yet of making a bad like moral decision, but I knew that where the state of my emotions were and my mind was and my body and everything at that point, that I was like, I can see I can see why pastors have moral failures. Like I
Yeah.
can like because I could right now, like it's like in that moment, it's like I could see like that looking advantageous because it's a way out,
Yeah.
right? So I'm like, I want to be the one who chooses to
Yeah.
to take myself out. I don't want to be taken out by a bad decision. So I decided to take time off. My church graciously gave me 9 weeks off. So not quite a year, but 9 weeks. But I knew at that point. I mean, I knew I needed to come back. Um, Again, church plant were like 80 people, so I knew I needed to come back. But I also knew that I wasn't coming back for good. I
Yeah.
began to make an exit strategy.
Yeah. And I somewhere in that story, and by the way, you and I'm gonna, if you're okay with it, I'm gonna take you deeper into that story on a different podcast. You and I are scheduled to be do an interview for the 95 podcast in the near future, and it'll probably release in early 2024. But if you're okay with it, maybe dig into more of the details because I'm sure
Yeah,
there's people in our audience going, man, we just need to stop right here and have a conversation about overall pastoral health and how does someone get there? How do you avoid getting
yeah,
to that place? So we'll save some of those questions for another interview. But I know it was somewhere in that season or shortly thereafter that somebody told me about you because I was going through kind of some similar things. I mean, my story was
yeah,
a little different, but same deal from the standpoint of like I knew my time in my role as a lead pastor was coming to an end. I was also running on fumes. I had experienced a considerable amount of loss in some different areas of my life. And instead of processing that in a healthy way, I'm just head down, run faster, run harder, and let's try and get through
right.
this thing. And yeah, in hindsight, looking back, I can see I probably stayed a little bit longer than I should have. And this is the part I know from my story that'll resonate with many, and I'm curious how this affects or plays into your story. I didn't have anything else to go to, really. I mean, I didn't know who I was outside of being a pastor, even though I actually had another job at the time. I was at that point back into full-time firefighting. So I still had a stream of income. There was still something about me saying, I can't just go be that. I'm more than that. I'm there. It was so core to my identity. It's like, I don't know who I am
Mhm.
if I'm not in that church role. Like, was that anything? Did you struggle with that identity piece of like, what is
Oh
it?
yeah.
Jeff goes and does something else.
Yeah. I mean, well, here's the thing. So like, even like going through that burnout, like I felt like such a failure because not only was I planting this church, but we had a lot of financial support and a lot of people backing us. I mean, this was my third time around. The second church plant was wildly successful by all accounts. And so there was a lot of high expectations upon me, none of which were probably as high as my own expectations.
Hmm.
But on top of that, I was a church planting director for a 5-state region. So
Hmm.
I'm coaching other church planters. And here I am, like my own church plant might not make it.
Wow.
And so that was causing me like tons of angst, I guess, and just like, yeah, who am I? What else am I gonna do? I've been doing this for the past 18 years, so who am I apart from this? Like, I know I have got skills, but are they marketable to anybody outside of
Yeah.
the church?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of things that go through your mind. Like, and here's, I mean, I don't know if we want to go down this road, but I know that there are a lot of other pastors that are in that same boat,
Yeah.
right? And I saw that in some of my own peers and colleagues. Like, they're only in ministry because they can't do anything else. They've been doing it so long and they've outstayed their welcome. They've lost the fire. Maybe it's not a healthy situation, but where are they going to go? What are they going
Yeah.
to do when they feel trapped?
The only pushback I would give that, and it's very gentle pushback, is just the part of they can't do anything else. That's a perception. It's not a reality.
Right.
The reality is you have skills. It's one of the things we do at EntrePastors is we try to help pastors recognize the skill set that you've been using in pastoral ministry for decades, much of the time. That is a very transferable set of skills and needed set of skills for the marketplace, and can be rewarded financially if we just package it a little differently. And but
Yeah.
you're not just a pastor that has nothing to offer the world outside the walls of the four walls of a church building. But it's still a mindset. The perception is real in many pastors' minds of, I don't, what else would I do?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
maybe even the
Absolutely.
permission of, can I do it? Like, is it okay? Am I disappointing God if I were to quit, quote unquote, serving him and go do some secular work? Like, again, that's a whole nother issue that we deal with often with our clients and with our audience, is giving them that permission. That ministry is anywhere you show up and serve people in the name of Jesus. It's not just from
Yes.
a pulpit. Um,
Yep. Agree
well,
100%.
we can set aside maybe the painful parts of that story for just a minute, and I want to make a statement, and you can respond to it. Somebody who's planted 3 churches has to have some level of an entrepreneurial wiring in them. So have you always seen yourself as an entrepreneur, or do you currently see yourself as an entrepreneur? Like, in terms of self-awareness, how old were you? When did you realize, like, I'm wired to go start things and build things from the ground up?
Yeah. I think it was somewhere probably in my mid 20s when I realized it, that um, I went through this actually with, I've been a part of a church plant. I was on a launch team with a church plant, and that pastor, was mentoring me, and we did, I think it was Arthur Miller, why you can't be anything you want to be, something like that. Anyway, so it's kind of like tracing your life story, like, what are my passions and those sort of things. And so going back through that, I realized that I had started all of these things. I hadn't started a business or anything, but I was always starting, a club or a ministry or a group or something. And so I was always the one that was like, well, I'm not going to join something. I'm going to start something.
Mhm.
Right. So it's probably in my mid 20s that I kind of look at it and go, oh, wow, I am really a starter. Um, which, yeah, fit great into church planting.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is because, again, so I recognize our target audience is pastors, but it's not just pastors. It's a specific type of pastor, and that is someone who either is or can learn to be an entrepreneur, who kind of has some of that natural makeup. Not all pastors are wired that way, and I understand that. Not all people
Mhm.
are wired to be entrepreneurs, but a lot of times we don't see it in the church world. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is we just think, well, I'm a pastor. It took me a long time, Jeff, to realize, wait a minute, like, God made me to be an entrepreneur. He used that skill set to come and plant a church in South Dakota where there was no church, to grow that. And by the way, in that season, to plant 6 different locations of that church. So there was, for a long time, that was what energized me, man, was I was always starting something new, but I just
Yeah.
thought it was a pastor. I didn't realize how entrepreneurial that was. And then anytime those promptings would come outside of the church, meaning when I'm drawn to listen to a business podcast or read a business book or be encouraged by stories of like successful startup businesses, I always felt a little bit of guilt about that. Like, why am I so interested in this business stuff? God has not called me to that. But looking back now with a little more maturity and a little more season, I go, of course he did. Like, I didn't recognize it in the early years. I didn't know how much of an entrepreneur I was, but I just thought of that as you're telling your story, like multiple church starts, church plants. Like that's that takes an entrepreneurial skill set. Plus now you've started a business.
Yeah.
Have you said just a minute ago, you hadn't really launched any other businesses. So is the current business you have the only business you've ever started?
Yep. Yep. That's correct.
Cool. We'll get into that in just a minute, but I want to back up a second and talk about the transition. There's a reason I want to peel into your story. For one, I'm inspired and jealous at the same time by your story, and I want your story to be my story of moving from the cold north to the Florida climate.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, even though I'm partly serious about that, uh, there's some principles or some themes I think we can draw out of this story of transition. Because again, I think in pastoring, sometimes we just get bought into this notion that this is my lot. I mean, this is where I am, and to want something different or more is me being unfaithful to the calling that God has had. And sometimes we do need to stay put. Sometimes God wants us to go through some stuff and stay there and be faithful. And sometimes it's totally a God thing to start a fresh new season, whether that's geographically moving or starting something new or whatever. And you walk through that, and I got to be, kind of in your corner as you were making that transition. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how did that go down? And because I know we joke about the weather and all of that, but seriously, it was a good thing for you to make that physical move from Minnesota down to Florida.
Oh
So
yeah.
just tell a little bit of that story if you don't mind.
All right. The story of starting the business or the story of moving to
The
Florida?
moving, we'll get to the business in a
Okay.
minute because the business was before you moved, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Do you want to
So
tell that story first? Does it tell the story better to talk
no,
business?
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
So I mean, it's all kind of intertwined. It's the burnout, and you mentioned loss. Like we experienced a lot of loss in that season as well. Um, and then moving and the business, it was kind of all related because the opening or the business opened the door really for us to move in a
Okay.
lot of ways. So
Well, then
uh,
tell us about the business. Then we'll talk about the move. So
well,
what's your business?
well, here we'll get into that section. So here's the significant thing. So after that burnout, I remember being down in Florida at a conference with one of my best friends, and we're walking on the beach. And I just said, it's January in Florida. And so I said, I wish that I could move here. Like I just feel so alive whenever I'm here. And he just looked at me and he said, well, why can't you? And I was just like, that just hit me for the first time. And I think that's really important for our audience. No matter what it is, it's like, why can't you? Who
Yeah.
told you you couldn't?
Wow.
You know? And that because that changed everything. It was just like, well, why can't I? Yeah, like I don't have to stay here. Like I can choose. And so that opened the door for us. I came home and I'm like, told my wife, like, babe, I think it's time. I think we should move to Florida. And her mom was down here. We've been coming down for 20 some years to visit her, and we would talk off and on about someday, maybe, if God releases us, we'll move down there. And so that was the thing, and then was, it took us as a year and a half, I think, transition, and COVID happened in there and everything, before we actually moved. But it was that simple question that
Hmm.
sparked it. Why can't you?
Hmm. And some of the positive things that happened, I mean, like I remember in that season as you were making that transition and then the aftermath of starting to live in a new place, like it literally had an impact on your mental health and overall well-being. I mean, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I had been on meds for depression for, I think, the last 12 years. I think we're in Minnesota, and probably should have started a lot sooner. I just always put off meds. Like I wanted to try everything else, but when I finally got on it, I was like, oh, I wish I would have done this a long time ago. Um, and um, so then when we moved here to Florida, like I didn't have, one of the big risks moving from Minnesota to Florida is Minnesota's got great healthcare. Florida, not so much. So we knew we were giving up that aspect. And so I didn't have any, we didn't have any healthcare when we moved down here. So I didn't have a way to fulfill or to get my prescription refilled.
Hmm.
And so I just milked it for as long as I could. Like I would start cutting the pills in half and taking half a pill every other day, stretched a month prescription to 3 months. And I didn't notice any difference. And then I was like, well, let's just go without. And I've been going without for over 3 years now. So after 12 years on meds in which the dosage kept getting ramped up, I went really almost cold turkey. I mean, I weaned myself off for a little bit and then went cold turkey, and I have not been on meds since. And it's really cool because, we're recording this in early November. I don't know if I can say that,
Yeah, you can.
but but it's significant because we just got through October, and October would always be the hardest time for me in Minnesota because before the time changes and it's so dark in the morning and it's starting to get cold, and it was always like this doom of like, this is just the beginning of what's
Yeah.
coming. It's going to
Yeah.
be cold and dark now for the next 6 months. And so here, although it's the same darkness, I haven't enjoyed the dark mornings. It's like I'm going out in my shorts and t-shirt in the dark. It's a lot different than getting bundled up in the dark
Yeah.
and scraping ice off your windshield and everything. And so it's just, and the sunshine. I mean, I think on average, I think Florida has 85 more days of sunshine than Minnesota in a year. So I think, it's just, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
You,
And
you know,
right now my attorneys are in my earpiece saying you got to put the disclaimer that John and Jeff are not giving, medical advice to anybody. So consult your doctor on all these things. And yet here's my
yeah.
question, Jeff, is do you attribute that just simply to the biological reality of there's more sunshine and that whole thing? Or do you think, was there anything in addition to that, just in terms of the weight of pastoral leadership that you had been doing for 18 years? Like, was that part of it too, did that play a role in some of that improving of the mental health for you? What would you say to that?
I'd say that definitely was some of it, but I think actually it was far less of it than I thought it was when we were in
Okay.
Minnesota.
Okay.
Because we were in Minnesota for, um, well, I guess a year, a little over a year after I stepped out of ministry. We were still in Minnesota. And then I stepped back into ministry here 2 years ago. And so I've got kind of, some non-ministry time in Minnesota and some non-ministry and ministry time here in Florida to compare to.
Yeah.
And, I've felt the weight of stepping back into ministry, but I also know, like, when we were in Minnesota and I was out of ministry, it was still like, it always just felt like there's a dark cloud hanging over me, for so much of the year.
Yeah.
And, so here it's like I've had days where, it's like, oh man, I feel, depressed, feel low energy, whatever today. But it only lasts a day.
Yeah.
It's not like weeks and months, like how I
Yeah.
felt like it was up north.
That's the thing. And I've had conversations, not a ton, but a few with other pastors that, like I think of one, I won't say anything that would give his identity away, but he was living in a climate, high altitudes, and it just was not good for like his wife's physical health. And I recognize, like, for some, I don't want to just give everyone an excuse to just leave where you're at and where God has called you because there's something about the physical climate you may not like.
Mhm.
By the way, people up here, Jeff, always say about, well, Florida's got alligators and blah. I'm like, listen, I promise there have been far more people killed on icy, treacherous roads
Oh
than
yeah.
the alligator has ever killed. So you can take that one to the bank. But again, I do think I like this part of your story because it might be that piece of permission that a pastor needs to go, maybe it is okay for you to look at this and go, again, not everyone needs to hear this and pick up, call the U-Haul and plant, pick up and leave. But for some,
Yeah.
maybe that's part of the story. Maybe that's part of the next phase of your journey. So we'll kind of let that land wherever it needs to.
Yeah.
But
I'll
go
just I'll
ahead.
just say this to sum it up. Like, we believed, without a doubt that we were called to where we were. And so the best place to be is where you're called to be. But as soon as we felt like God released us from that calling, we were out,
Yeah.
so that's it, like go where God calls you to go, but you don't have to be a glutton for punishment, to be like, oh, I've got to, like a friend of mine who said, well, I just believe that there'll be, there's going to be oceans and mountains and eternity that will be way better than here, so I can deal with this temporary thing, this temporary cold, whatever it is. And like, hey, if that gets you through, great. But I also know that God loves us and wants us to be, you know at least happy in the sense that we're delighting in life. It's not a slog.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think it's something to look at. It's not that we're trying to escape every bit of, temporary displeasure, discomfort. We recognize we're all going to go through some stuff, but if there's a consistent chronic thing, I think it's wise to take a look at that and go. And like right now, just very transparently, I don't know where all this is leading, but I sense that stirring in my heart right now. That's like, and it's been building for a few years now of like, I'm ready for a change of scenery. I don't fully know what that means. I think I know what I would like it to mean, but I'm open to what God might have. And I'm going to lean into that instead of hearing that negative scarcity mindset of you serve a God who punishes people and says, oh, you don't like that? Well, then stick around, a little bit longer and learn to like it. It's
Right.
I'm preparing your heart for the next thing. So anyway, hopefully that's an encouragement to some listening. Well, tell us a little bit about the business that you have, because I don't know exactly when you launched it, but I know I was kind of watching from the corner as you were getting things up and going. And so let's talk about that. What's your business?
Yeah, my business is Church Plant Solutions, and we do bookkeeping and accounting, and soon to do taxes this year for pastors. So we do this all for churches. And so um, this began right after that season of Burnout. And when I went back into ministry, and after having that conversation, that question posed to me from my friend, well, why can't you? I started trying to figure out, well, what can I do? I've been a pastor for 18 years. So I started looking at, all these different things, like where do my skills transfer? And, I could see lots of things, but really my heart wasn't in it. Like, I'm like, I still love the church. I still am passionate about Jesus. And so if there's a way that I can still serve the church, even without being a pastor, I want to be able to do that. And so I remember like, you get these articles all the time in your feed. And so like this one article was like 50 best side hustles or
Okay.
something, and they're like, all these, 49 of the 50 are not applicable, but
Yeah.
but there was one that said start your own bookkeeping business. And I was like, hey, like, so the part of the story we didn't get to is I had worked for 4 years as a corporate accountant prior to becoming a pastor. And that's a whole different story, because I didn't have the education to get that either. But um so I was like, hey, like, I've been an accountant before, like I could probably do that. And I started churches, so I think I could start a business. And so um and I was, yeah, so I just like started looking into it, and I purchased a course to learn how to start the business and also get refreshed, because it's been 18 years since I've done accounting. So, go through all the refresher stuff. And I was amazed actually at how quickly a lot of it came back. And I was like, and I remember telling my wife, I was like, because I was originally looking at it as like some sort of side hustle. And then I was like, I think I can actually might be able to make a go at this. Like, I think that I've got enough connections. I've got the ability, the skills. I think I could actually make a go at this. And so it was enough where in June of 2019, I resigned from my church, and I was putting full time into Church Plant Solutions. So
Very cool. Yeah, and I've watched that business do fairly well. I mean, you've really built that up, and even earlier this year, you and I reconnected when you put a question in our EntrePastors Facebook group, our community, about scaling. Like, how to, I'm in a place of wanting to really scale this business. And so let me ask you this: for many in our audience, when they think about starting a business, there's maybe a lot of, and we've already touched on this a little bit, some of the mindset stuff around that, the limiting beliefs about, is this even okay? Do I have permission? Is it okay for me to make extra money beyond, what my church is paying me? All of that. Was that part of your story, or by the time you started your business, had you kind of worked through some of that, the mindset stuff, to where you're like, no, I need to do this and I'm quite okay if it thrives and takes off and does well? Like, how was that for you?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a progression. I remember, even when I was in your mastermind, like after going through burnout and everything, like I think my self-confidence was pretty low, like, felt like a failure stepping away from my church and all that stuff. And um so I had to go through this process of, regaining that confidence and who I am and how God's gifted me and shaped me and all that stuff. And I never felt guilty about, making additional money or anything. In fact, as a pastor, I always wished that I could make, like, I'm not handy at all. So I'm like, and I'm technically challenged. So like, like the easy sort of side hustles, like I see a lot of pastors doing, maybe the handyman jobs, or they do, some IT stuff or whatever. And I'm like, I don't have that kind of skills, so I wish I did, because I would like to make more money. And so when this came along, I was like, that's something that I can do. And so, but I tell you, the real decision point came, John, and I think is that after doing that for two years, 2.5 years, somewhere around there, and I felt like God was calling me back into church ministry, that's when I had to make a decision. Like my business had just gotten to the point where it could become almost a full-time income for me. And I had to make a decision. It's like, okay, I built up this business. Now, do I walk away from that? I can't do that full time and be a full-time pastor, but yet I feel like I'm called to both. And so that's when I had to make the decision about scaling. As that, I was like, either I walk away from the business, I sell the business, or I hire people to help me with the business.
Yeah.
And so that's what I ended up doing, and it's actually grown so much more since I did that in the last 2 years.
Man, I love that. And if you don't mind, well, we still have some time here. Tell just kind of the highlights of that story of circling back into where you are now, where you are on staff at a church. Like, how did that process go for you? And what I want people to hear in that story is that there's seasons to this, and it's okay. It's okay if there's a season of your ministry that you are not actively pastoring, and we can still be engaged in the ministry of business, and you still may have a chance down the road where God calls you back into it, and be okay with that. Like right now, I'm kind of in a similar place, Jeff. I'm on staff at a church, but I'm praying God never calls me back into full-time pastoring again, as I did. I never will. I will never go back into pastoring the way I was doing it. I
Yeah.
can promise you that. But anyway, like, tell your story. How did that happen for you to kind of circle back into church life again from a vocational?
Well, so even, working with churches and what I do, I still got to connect with pastors, but it's kind of like I'm on the outside looking in. And so
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of things that I was thankful that I wasn't a part of. Like I was out when COVID hit, I
Yeah.
was not a pastor, I was in a support role. And so I got to encourage the pastors that we were working with. And I was like, man, I'm so glad I'm not a pastor right now. I definitely, like, if I had not stepped out of ministry, like in the shape that I was in, like that would have been it. But at the same time, there was kind of this, like, it felt like I'm missing out, like like this was a huge challenge for the church, and I love a challenge, right? So I felt like I wanted to be a part of that challenge. And, we moved here to Florida, again, having the business open the door, because it's a remote business. I'm sitting in my bedroom right now, so like, I could do it anywhere. So, we just started attending a church, and I just started volunteering. I just started meeting with our lead pastor, and, the more I got involved in the church, and the more I had this hunger, because I'm a leader, and so there's an aspect of like owning a business where it's like, I'm doing this accounting and I can do that, but I feel like there's this whole other part of me that is not being utilized, which was the leadership capacity.
Yeah.
And so so I just remember, so God's stirring this up in me. And I just remember saying to him, probably we've been getting together for coffee, like probably, once a month for 6 months. And I just said, hey, like, I don't know, like if there'll ever be an opportunity for me here, but, I just feel like, I'd like to get back into pastoral ministry, some capacity at some point, so I just wanted to put that out there. And he was like, well, actually, I wanted to talk with you about that today.
Hmm.
And so the church, I didn't even know this, but the church was in the process of doing a massive reorganization of the structure of the staff, and realizing that the one component that they were missing, that they really felt that they needed for success, they didn't have on staff. And he felt like I was that missing piece.
Wow.
And so, you know, had 9 months more of conversation. So this is where, like, again, seasons and everything, like I had to figure out what to do with my business, so that was part of it on my end. I'm like, I don't know if I want to step back into full-time ministry. Um, and they had to figure things out, because I was coming in at an executive level in a way that they had to move other executive people all,
Mhm.
really out to move me in. And so it was a really delicate thing. And yeah, I don't know. It's just,
Jeff,
it
in
worked
that,
out great.
were you, so it sounds like you actively were talking with them about the fact that, hey, I have this business over here and that coming in, I'm going
Yes.
to be running that. Like, anything you want to say to that? Because I see that as the healthy model, if you will, moving forward, where pastors are not. Just today, literally, as we're recording this, I got a message from a pastor, and his question, as I decoded the question, was, how do I hide this from my church? How do I connect with people to build a network and be able to make sales without my church knowing that I'm in business? And it's like,
Yeah.
therein lies that we need to talk about that, because
Yeah.
I don't want you doing this in the dark and in secret. I want you to unashamedly be building a business and have a healthy church that goes, no, we're good with this. We're good with our pastor who also is in the marketplace. So what did that look like for you to have those conversations?
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, John, because this is huge. So, I had the benefit of having the business before having the conversations, right? So I was just upfront about that. And originally I told him I was probably going to sell the business or something, but then I said, hey, look, it doesn't make sense for me to sell it right now. Like, I'm at a point where I think I can actually build it, can continue to build it. So I'm going to keep the business. I'm going to bring some people on. Are you okay with that? And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. And so there was this understanding that I had this business and I was coming on. And so I have to give a shout out to my church, Deep Creek Community Church, and my pastor, Steve, because they've made space for me. And so, even like after spending, like the first 6 months, I was spending almost every night and, a lot of times my day off working on the business. And I'm like, this isn't sustainable. I'm going to burn myself out again. Like, I can't do this. So I went back to him. I said, hey, like, this isn't sustainable. Can I have, if I could just have a half day a week to work on the business, so I don't have to do it in the evenings and take that time away from my family, that would help a lot. And he said, absolutely, take whatever you need. And he's always been really grateful for that. So in essence, I don't know if I should say this, but in essence, the church pays me actually to work on my business, because I take every Thursday afternoon to work on my business while I'm still technically the church work week. And it's made a huge difference. That's what's made it go, is because I can have 4 or 5 hours dedicated together every week to work on it, which has allowed the business to continue to grow.
See, and I'm a huge fan of that, Jeff. I think that the church and the pastor both win when the pastor is healthy, and there's a lot of advantages for the church as well, for the pastor to have another stream of revenue and to where they are not 100% dependent upon the church. And so and also, so when possible, have that straight up open conversation.
Mhm.
And if you're not there, if your church isn't there yet, then my personal setting is, it's easier to ask forgiveness and permission, that I'm going to still work on this. I'm not asking anyone for their permission. And, I'm doing ministry. Bottom line, if I'm on a call with somebody and connecting with them, it's ministry. I'm serving them. And so anyway, that's maybe a different
Yeah.
conversation for another time, but
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, now I lost my thought, but I work, there's time that I take during the work week too, to answer emails or even to do like prospective client consultations. I might duck out of a church meeting to do that. And the thing is, I think my pastor sees, and I definitely see, and I think even other staff sees, just how they help each other. Like my role as an executive pastor makes me better in my business, and my business makes me better as an executive pastor.
Yes.
And so there really is a good relationship. Like I'm working on things and learning things in my ministry, church ministry role, that I think I'm helping translate to my business, that's helping my pastors and be better. And then there's things there like financially, that I'm seeing in other churches that I'm working on, that I can bring into our church and go, hey, I think this is probably a better way to do this. And so I really love it right now, the way it's all working out together. And so I
Yeah.
feel incredibly blessed by that.
I love that. And one more theme I want to draw out. We could keep going, but for the sake of time, I'm going to end with this, and then I have one kind of final question for you. And you can respond to what I'm getting ready to say. You said something earlier that I want to go back and just emphasize. You talked about really tapping into your skill set as a leader, and that is to build people. It's not just to do the technical work of bookkeeping. You're kind of missing something if you don't actually go to the next level of what it is you've honed that skill over the years of developing people and training other people and then handing off responsibility to them. I want pastors to hear that, because here, by the way, little side note, technical detail, if you don't do that in your business, you don't really have a business anyway. Technically, you have a job. You're self-employed and you do
Right.
the work. Nothing wrong with that, but technically it's not a business. It's truly a business when it operates without you. And think about it from a church leadership standpoint. Isn't that kind of what we're supposed to be getting it to, the place that this thing can run without me directly involved in all the stuff? I want to reproduce my leadership and other people, delegate stuff. It's the same in business. And this is what I want pastors to hear, is that even if you're not the guy or the gal with all the skills, you build the people who do the skilled stuff, and you lead the people. You pour into the people. This is why, again, I think pastors can thrive. I often say you have an unfair advantage in the marketplace if you see it as such. So anyway, I'm glad you mentioned
Yeah.
that. I just want to highlight that. You can respond
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah. I mean, I would just add to that, my personal context. I think we serve something like 28 churches on a monthly regular bookkeeping, accounting services, plus several other projects that we're working on. And I don't work in any of them. Like I don't do any bookkeeping, accounting. What I do is I work with prospective clients, doing that consultation, that initial onboarding, and I work with my team. And that's it. So I'm building my team, and coaching them, and they're coming to me with questions, but I'm not doing anything on a day-to-day basis, not doing anything related to accounting. I'm basically I'm a CEO in leadership. And
Yeah.
so, which is what I'm much better at than an
Just
accountant.
just to dress this up for our audience a little more, just so they can kind of visualize it for what it could look like for them. Right now, present day, this is where I am with my handyman business. Is, yeah, sometimes I'm still the guy, way more than I'd like. I'm still the guy out on the end of the ladder doing the thing. My vision for that, if I really lean into it and choose to take it to what I would call its full maturity, would be the days coming where I have a team that does all of that. And my role, what would be a sweet spot for me, would be to meet with that team once a week, to lead them in some kind of personal growth and development thing, to see that business be a platform of ministry where we're hiring some people that are unhirable in other areas and helping them get their life back on track, giving them a skill, whether working alongside of someone who I can trust and do know. And that many people would say, God got a hold of my life when I went to work for this company. And
Mhm.
my role is I don't do any of the day-to-day stuff. I have a business that's out there making money for me, and that business is an incredible platform for ministry. And my skill set is I develop people, and that's that's a vision that I can get behind, and I could do that in any business. I
Yeah.
really believe that. I don't have to necessarily be an expert in the stuff that we do. And so I just want pastors to hear that, like and call them to that vision. And if your business never goes beyond just you being a sole, single operator and it's a source of income, great. It's not a dishonor. You don't have to scale it for it to be successful.
Yeah. And I think that I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of pastors underestimate their ability to build other people, right? You can't be a good pastor, I don't think, without being a good builder of people. And so that might be the most translatable asset that you have to building a business, is to be able to build other people.
Man, this is good, Jeff. Really good stuff. I wanted to end by just asking the question, if someone wanted to connect with you, either to go deeper into your story or even to connect with your business and say, hey, my church needs a bookkeeper, or as I hear you getting into it, I need someone to do my taxes who gets pastoral taxes and that sort of thing. Like, what's the best way for people to connect with you and follow up?
Yeah, you can go to our website, churchplantsolutions.com, and on there you can learn more about us, and you can set up a consultation, just a Zoom call where we can just talk and learn about how we might be able to help you. And you can email me, jeff@churchplantsolutions.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well, and LinkedIn.
All right, man. Well, Jeff, this has been fun. The time's flown by way too fast. I look forward to connecting with you and going deeper into other parts of your story on the 95 podcast in the days ahead. So All the best, and thanks for your time investing into this community, man.
All right. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.